As you can see, my garage is lit up pretty good. I changed the light bulb up here, which is something I didn't do. I'm procrastinating. So my ass finally get off my ass and change that light bulb. So now you're gonna see way better in my garage. I don't know why I didn't do this before. It's way better lighting. I can see a lot better. And you can see a lot better the video. Good morning, welcome to the Wednesday edition of The Great Unfolding. Rob Weil here in Canada, Alberta, Canada, cold, chilly, snowy, Alberta. All right, today I'm going to discuss, and I'm going to read this, and I'm going to go through it because it's important to understand the Dais of Christ. Our presentation before Christ, our head. This is what it's concerned about. The bema seat, the step-up seat, where we will receive wages. And this article is called Revealed by Fire. In the Corinthian epistles, the dais is brought before us in connection with our work, especially the administration of God's secrets and our good and bad practices. Corinth is a good background for all these aspects, as the saints there specialized in failure to live up to the truth and needed to be reminded of the future test which will be applied to it. It is especially helpful today when false motives and incentives and wrong standards are used in God's work, so that the most of it is only fit for the flames. Paul used a fine figure in setting forth the work of the Corinthian ecclesia, especially the part played by himself and those who succeeded him there. It is represented as a building of which he laid the foundation and left the superstructure to others. The quality of the work is figured by materials of various value, but rated especially according to their fire-resistant qualities. Most of the monuments of antiquity which still remain are built of costly stones. Very little else is left of the temple on Mount Moriah, but the large, expensive stones in the foundation. The gold and silver doubtless would still be there, also if it had not been carried away. The work which will abide that day is figured by the material kingdom. The figure of the farmer. The work of the Lord's servants will earn wages at the dais of our Lord, even though he provides the very vigor with which it is accomplished. This is shown to us in the figure of the farmer. He plants and irrigates, but what would that avail if God did not make it grow up? Without the life he stored in the seed and the warmth he sends from the sun, the seed would rot and the labor bestowed upon it would be in vain. Yet the farmer does not hesitate to harvest the crop. Too often he deems it his due, the product of his own toil, and forgets to give thanks to him whose beneficence it is. 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 5 through 9. Paul transfers this to himself and Apollos in a figure in order that the saints should not be puffed up for one over the other. In reality, the farmer plays a very small part in the production of his crops, and so it is in the Lord's service. Paul, as an evangelist, may lead the Corinthians to believe, and Apollos may foster their faith, but all would have been in vain without the vital power of God. Paul was only calling those whom God had already chosen. Before Paul preached, God assured him that he had many of his own in the city. Acts chapter 18, verse 17. Why then should they set these men up as if they had produced the crop? Neither one is to get the credit, but praise and thanksgiving should always go to God, for he it is who was and is that provided them with the ability to do their part. Only from God alone. How do we get anything without God giving it first through Christ, our head? The enlightened servant of God will not lay claim to anything at the dais of Christ. Without his life, his strength, his faith, his zeal, he would never have been able to lift his hand in the Lord's service. All of these were gifts from God, none inherent in himself. If an earthly master had made an automatic machine and had performed the part planned for it, does he pay it wages? But we are not machines, and God is not a man. He will get his heart's desire in the love engendered by his operations. And to further fan this affection, he pays wages, where little has actually been earned or deserved. His servants will be rewarded according to their toil. 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 8. The figure of the builder. But the amount of work done by anyone is not necessarily an index of its value in God's sight. In order to illuminate this aspect of service, Paul uses a different figure, that of a building. The growing of a crop is a seasonal effort and produces no permanent results. A building is erected to last indefinitely, depending upon the materials used. There is going to be a fire in the future which will consume our whole building except that which will stand the flames. We should therefore be very choice in our materials and use only such as will abide the conflagration. The two classes of materials will seem very strange to us at first glance. We do not erect buildings out of gold and silver and precious stones. If we did, they would be very small. We do use wood, grass, and straw, and with these we can make a marvelous show. Aside from the value of the materials, the principal difference in that the former are fireproof. The precious stones, fireproof. The latter, inflammable, which is the wood, hay, and grass, and stubble, and all that. The true servant of God will seek to use nothing in edifying the saints that will not stand the fire. Apollos was the builder in Corinth. After Paul had laid the foundation, hence the figure is to be explained by his ministry there. He was their teacher. We are introduced to Apollos as follows in Acts chapter 18, verse 24. Now a certain Jew named Apollos, a native Alexandrian, a scholarly man, arrives at Ephesus, being able in the scriptures. He was instructed in the way of the Lord and fervent in spirit. He spoke and taught accurately what concerns Jesus, being versed only in the baptism of John. Besides, he begins to speak boldly in the synagogue. Now hearing him, Priscilla and Aquila took him to themselves and expounded the way of God to him more accurately. The material then consisted of the teaching which he imparted to the Corinthians, and it is the accuracy of his doctrines that leads us to think that Apollos used a good deal of gold and silver in his construction, which will remain to his credit in that day. The building materials. We may rest assured that neither Paul nor Apollos erected a church building in Corinth, especially not of literal gold and silver and precious stones. Yet there is ample evidence in the epistle itself that these are the materials they used, in contrast to wood, grass, and straw, which is so freely used today, not indeed in the literal buildings, but in the spiritual edification of the saints. In this passage, Paul and Apollos are teachers, and we should consider their doctrine if we wish to recognize what each material represents. Yet this letter is not a systematic statement of their teaching, so it is not so easy to identify the materials as in Romans, which sets forth their message in clearly defined aspects. Corinthians is more of a laboratory than a textbook. So we turn to Romans and its three great themes: justification, reconciliation, and the deity of God, to explain the figure. In Romans, we have three distinct divisions of the doctrine, which Paul dispensed in Corinth, Justification is the great basic truth on which all is built. This may well be figured by the great stones, the precious stones, such as we used in erecting the temple. This is the manward side of the evangel. Then comes conciliation and reconciliation, figured by silver. This is mutual, because both man and God must be conciliated before there can be reconciliation. Then there is the gold, God's sovereignty, the deity as disposer, the divine aspect of our evangel. The most glorious of all of these doctrines are eternal, everlasting. There, we can use that word, eternal or everlasting, in that. And the fact that the sovereignty of God and the deity as disposer, these are high truths, and these will last. They will abide even after the consummation, when all mankind will be justified and all creation reconciled, and God becomes all and all in all. No fire will ever destroy these eternal verities. Okay, I'm going to start these, each one, break them down. It starts with the gold, the silver, and the precious stones. So we're going to learn something here. The gold is God's glory as the great disposer. It is most deplorable to see even intelligent saints shrink from giving the deity his proper place as God and deny the plainest declarations of Holy Writ. The golden all is out of him, is degraded into the wooden man's free will moral agency. Or it may be that all good is acknowledged to be out of him, or all essential to his plan, or some other of many desperate restrictions which would leave man a share in divine glory. How can God be all in all until all this has been burnt up? Man's machinations, man's ideas, man's philosophy, all that crap needs to be burnt up in the great conflagration after the next 1,000 years, when the whole thing will combust. Then there will be a new heavens and a new earth. Let us take heed that above all else we do not infringe on the glory that is God's alone. For we may rest assured that the fire will eagerly devour all that hinders him from taking his place supreme in the beginning, as well as at the consummation. All is out of him, all is through him, and all is for him. Scream it to the mountaintops. All right, the silver. The true relationship between God and man at the present time is practically unknown. Hence is not preached from our pulpits in Christendom. The silver doctrine that the death of God's Son has conciliated him to mankind is not only ignored, but strenuously opposed by both priests and people. Indeed, instead we have the grass of fear and threats of the purgatory and hell, of law-keeping and religion, all of which is fit only for the fire and cannot last in the coming eons or the consummation, when God wipes away all tears in the last eon and reconciles the whole universe at the consummation. Let us burn up all such futile and inflammable doctrine, now rather than wait until the dais. Then we will be thankful to see it feed the flames. So what I said before, we'll be dancing around the fire when everything burns up. All the saints who see all the crap, all that bad, all the crap burn up at the dais. Are you not going to be happy? We're going to do a happy dance around the fire and roast great big marshmallows and have great big s'mores right there at the dais when we see all that crap burn up. All right, the precious stones. In English idiom, the word precious, as applied to stones, is limited to small gems or jewels of great beauty or rarity. But in the scriptures, it is also used of large hewn building stones. Some of these were much more expensive than the average gem, because of the great labor involved in quarrying and cutting and transporting them. The order of the words gold, silver, precious stones, suggests that jewels are not in view, for they are more precious than gold. Besides, few would care to test them by fire. A close friend of mine had a process of making small commercial gems by means of a retort. In a figure such as this, there should be no question of their fire resistance. In the Orient, one often sees buildings that have been ravaged by fire and tested by the tooth of time. In the great temples at Athens and Baalbek and Jerusalem, there is not much left of their ancient architecture, except stones, many of them tremendous in size and great in cost. Their lasting quality is most striking in the midst of magnificent ruins. As the figure here is in the contrast with straw, which was often used for fuel and seldom survives a single year. Such stones as these are impressive when used to suggest a doctrine. In Romans, it would stand for justification. Again, we sigh at the almost total lack of teaching on this tremendous theme. Even when the word is used, the sense is diluted to pardon or forgiveness of sins, such as belongs to the kingdom administration. In the land of Luther, I attended meetings in his own house, along with several hundred other editors of Protestant religious publications, and I found no evidence that any of them, with perhaps one exception, really grasped its vital significance. Some of them were excessively zealous and ready for any sacrifice for the cause of their Lord, yet they were engaged in teaching that which would be food for the flames at the dais. The pardon of sins is a temporary measure limited to the kingdom heralding, which will be obsolete when all men are justified at the consummation. It will be seen from this that the teaching which will come through the fire and call for wages has two distinctive features, which may help us to identify it and avoid that figured by the wood, the grass, and the straw. The picture of houses built of wood, grass, and straw is not put before us, because they are not good building material. Many a shelter from the elements is built entirely of them. Right, wood, hay, straw, grass. The house in which this is written is built mostly of wood, the outside being an almost rot-proof siding and shingles of so-called redwood. It has lasted about 30 years, and it is still good, but it certainly will not stand a test by fire. So it is with much of the teaching of Christendom today. Salvation is brought to men by some of it, and the saints are helped, but most of the teaching belongs to the kingdom. It is not only out of place now, but it will not pass the fiery inspection of the dais. Not only must our teaching be Paul's rather than Peter's, but it must be fireproof. It must be such that it will never be destroyed or replaced. That is the special characteristic of the evangel for today. It is everlasting, quote unquote. It is not only true of the saints now, but will be expanded to include all at the consummation. We are justified now, and all mankind will enjoy it after the eons. We are reconciled now, and all creation will be included when God is all in all. God is all in us now. He will be all in all at the consummation. Perfect way to end it. This portion, I'm going to finish it tomorrow. The kind of work that remains. So, stay tuned. Tomorrow it's going to be great. I'm explaining and expounding upon the truth that's true when it comes to the Dais of Christ and our standing before Christ. Honestly, if we're doing service in the Lord, it has to be from the heart of God. It has to be rooted and grounded in love. It has to be built on that foundation. So this is why I wanted to bring that. You know, it's a building. We are building a building. And yesterday I talked about building each other up. Well, this is important to understand first what you're building on. if you understand and have a clarification and a realization of what you're building upon, which is Christ. Christ died, Christ was entombed, and Christ was roused the third day. This is your starting point right there. And build on that foundation upward toward God. That's the only way there will be wages given, is if we build on the proper foundation of Christ. So have a happy Wednesday. We will see you tomorrow, and we'll continue with this article. It's very, very good for edification for the saints. I love you all.